Did you see that in your father's life and also in Johnny Cash's life, that they were both going back into their past? They were also overcoming their own need to be seen as a human being.
I suppose so. I think when it comes to this kind of pursuit of success in the public eye, obviously we're talking about degrees. Johnny Cash was an eminently talented singer. He didn't write half the songs people think he did, but he was most definitely reputed to have an encyclopedic brain when it came to music, songs, roots, and he was destined to do what he did, and I don't think he was doing it necessarily to seek acceptance, like to the same degree that most people who come to Hollywood do. And the same is more or less true of my father. My father was probably more in search of acceptance and approval unconsciously than perhaps Johnny was. But again, not necessarily to the degree we often see here in Hollywood, particularly on reality television. I mean, there are things where people draw the line, but certainly my father's story is one that's not unlike any immigrant, firstborn in this country, who grew up in the Depression and who had to sort of reinvent himself without education. The interesting thing about Johnny and Saul, on paper, they come from completely different worlds, but the dynamic in the film is such that Johnny is addicted to pills and my father to the bottle. And it makes for a very interesting and compelling comparison and contrast. But they also had many other common aspects to their background. Both men grew up poor. Both men lost a sibling to tragic death. Both men served in the Air Force. Both men were door-to-door salesmen. Both men auditioned to be DJs. So they were very different, but they were alike also, though neither would ever admit it.
That's what I found fascinating, that they did have this, even though you said in the film it was a tumultuous relationship, but in some ways they were so different in that it seemed like Johnny Cash sort of just threw things to the wind and was living on his own terms, whereas Saul seemed very organized and a planner and very disciplined. So do you think that that was their pull, that underneath all of that, whatever their public facade was or who they wanted the world to see them as, that they had that sort of those same roots, that they were trying to sort of pull themselves up?
Absolutely. I do believe they were both trying to pull themselves up, but you make an excellent point about the contrast of their personalities, in the sense that Johnny was pretty wild and lived life on his own terms, and Saul was, as you said, very organized, very serious. And it's interesting, a lot of people sort of remark after seeing the movie that they forget that it takes more than one person to achieve success on the order of a famous singer like Johnny Cash, that there are other people involved in that success that don't seem to get mentioned in the Hollywood telling of such stories. But I would say that in a sense they were yin and yang. They were so different, but their differences complemented one another. And together, as volatile as that relationship was, their partnership, their relationship over that period of time yielded the most remarkable things in Johnny's career between the late 1950s and early 1970s, the interesting years, if you will. So I'm not suggesting that there wouldn't have been a Johnny Cash without a Saul Holiff, but there's no question that together the sum was greater than the, I forget how the saying goes, the total was greater than the sum of its parts, right. Something like that.
Well, there was a great part, and I hope this isn't a spoiler. If it is, we'll take it out. But that Johnny Cash says he felt sorry for Elvis that he didn't have a wonderful manager such as Saul Holiff, because he realized that that was a huge part of his success.
That was a very high compliment from Johnny. It was given to a writer, while they were doing a story on my father. So he was being quite generous, and it was nice of him to say. But certainly, they were. It was an interesting story when you consider Saul's contemporaries, Colonel Tom Parker with Elvis or Brian Epstein with the Beatles. Saul had one important difference. His client was all but unmanageable in the 1960s. So it really does make for a fascinating story.